everyone. So this video is about our last minute preparation batch and it's a demo class kind of. So let us start without wasting much of time. Okay. So this is our last minute preparation batch. Yeah, for February 2022. This is basically conducted by me and Dr. Aftab, and this is to prepare you well for the this part one exam, FOP and task exam that is going to be held in February 16th to make you more confident. Okay. So what are we going to do here is that what are we covering in this course? First is that we are going to cover about 25 to 30 important topics of FOP and TAS in detail, each FOP and TAS in detail to cover all the frequently asked questions, as well as we are going to give overview of the clinical cases and we are going to do one recall paper. Now, when I say 25 to 30 important topics we are going to be studying, I want to show you one or two topics, how it has to be studied, not in the way that just read the topic and it's done. We are not going to be studying in this way. So I have chosen the topic diuretics. And we are going to study in a way that after studying this, after seeing this slide, you will be able to answer all the recalls that are related to this topic and you will be able to answer everything. And there is a case of diuretics in the clinical cases as well, and I have tried to include everything possible here. So let us begin. Okay, so first, what are the different types of diuretics we have? First one, we have loop diuretics such as furosemide. So where do they act? Loop diuretic, they act on the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle. Then we have the thiazide diuretics. Thiazide diuretic, they act on the distal convoluted tubule. Then we have spironolactone, which is a potassium sparing diuretic. It acts on the collecting duct. So these three diuretics and where they act is really important. Okay, so that is why we have to remember this. If you see this picture, then you'll be able to understand that okay, where does this act, because questions are frequently being asked from there. So thiazide diuretics act on the distal convoluted tubule. Loop diuretic act on the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle. Spironolactone act on the collecting duct. Okay. And in addition to this, there are a few other things that I would like to act. One is osmotic diuretics. For example, mannitol. Mannitol acts on the thin ascending limb of loop of Henle. Usually, mannitol is not included in the diuretics, but you will find this question of osmotic diuresis in case of diabetic ketoacidosis. Whenever there is cerebral edema, they use mannitol and it causes osmotic diuresis. And then the question in the recall comes as such: what is the mechanism of action of mannitol? So mannitol causes osmotic diuresis. Where does it act? It acts on the thin ascending limb of loop of Henle. So from this picture, just remember four things. Thiazide act on the distal convoluted tubule. Loop diuretic, that is furosemide, act on the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle. Spironolactone acts on the collecting duct. Okay. Next one important question that is often asked in the recall is, what is the pump or what is the transporter, on what do they act on, the diuretics? For example, the loop diuretic. The loop diuretic acts on the sodium potassium 2 chloride channel. So what happens when it acts on that? We are going to study about that in a while. And the thiazide diuretic acts on the sodium chloride channel. And the potassium sparing diuretic, that is spironolactone, acts on the sodium potassium hydrogen channel. So this is thing you have to remember. And the carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, this is not much important, but it is important in case of idiopathic intracranial hypertension. They'll ask you carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, where does it act? It acts on the proximal convoluted tubule. So you have to remember that loop diuretics act on the sodium potassium 2 chloride channel, and it is going to block this channel. So there will be reduced reabsorption of sodium chloride as well as potassium. So there will be more and more diuresis, loss of these electrolytes along with water. Similar way, thiazide will block the sodium chloride channel and there will be reduced reabsorption, no reabsorption of sodium chloride. So there will be diuresis. Sodium and chloride will be excreted via the urine. And we know whenever sodium is excreted, water is excreted along with it. So it causes diuresis. Same for the spironolactone, or known as potassium sparing diuretics. it acts on the collecting tubule. So it's going to block the sodium potassium hydrogen ion channel, but it will not lead to excretion of potassium. That is why it is known as potassium sparing diuretics. Therefore, it will lead to loss of sodium as well as water. So potassium sparing diuretic, or known as spironolactone, is known as aldosterone antagonist because it antagonizes the normal function of aldosterone. What is the normal function of aldosterone? Reabsorption of sodium as well as water and excretion of potassium. Okay, so we have to be very thorough with this. Along with this, one important thing is the antidiuretic hormone. The antidiuretic hormone, also the questions I have seen in the recall, where does the antidiuretic hormone act? The antidiuretic hormone acts on the collecting tubule. This is the collecting tubule of the kidney, and it causes reabsorption of water. That's it. Now let us move. Yes. So this one is the furosemide, mechanism of action of furosemide. Furosemide will block the sodium potassium 2 chloride symport channel in the loop of Henle, and therefore it will increase the excretion of sodium chloride along with water, and therefore increase the urine flow and cause diuresis. So it acts as a diuretic. Now, what will be the biochemical picture since is going to block the sodium, potassium, and chloride channel? So there will be hyponatremia, there will be hypokalemia because it will block the potassium as well, hypochloremia. Along with this, there will be metabolic alkalosis. So furosemide is going to prolong use of furosemide also causes one syndrome, we know. So they're going to give you a question like, okay, a child has come to you and the biochemical picture is hyponatremia, hypokalemia, hypochloremia with metabolic alkalosis, and there has been use of there is no history. There may be a history of use of diuretics and there may be not. So you have to think about furosemide, because furosemide, excessive use of furosemide leads to this biochemical picture: hyponatremia, hypokalemia, hypochloremia with metabolic alkalosis. Along with that, there will be hypocalcemia. So now whenever there is hypocalcemia along with all these features, it shows the biochemical picture of Bartter syndrome. So what is Bartter syndrome? Bartter syndrome, it can be caused due to congenital, it may be congenital or may be caused due to prolonged use of furosemide. In Bartter syndrome, we'll have a similar biochemical picture. Okay. Now let us look at thiazide. Now thiazide, it acts on the distal convoluted tubule and blocks the sodium chloride co-transporter system, and therefore there will be excretion of sodium chloride along with water and therefore cause diuresis. Now what will be the blood picture? There will be hyponatremia, hypokalemia, hypochloremia, metabolic alkalosis. This is the biochemical picture after prolonged use of thiazide. Also, prolonged use of thiazide causes one more syndrome known as Gitelman syndrome. Now, how will you identify between Gitelman syndrome and Bartter syndrome? Because in the previous slide itself, the biochemical picture is same: hyponatremia, hypokalemia, hypochloremia with metabolic alkalosis. The difference is that in case of use of thiazide or in case of Gitelman syndrome, one is there will be hypercalcemia in case of Gitelman, there will be hyperuricemia, along with that there will be hypomagnesemia. I forgot to write that. So hypomagnesemia will only be there in case of Gitelman syndrome, and in case of Bartter syndrome or prolonged use of furosemide, there will be no hypomagnesemia. There will be only hypocalcemia. So that is going to be the question. And they are going to give you a picture and they're going to say a patient has come to you with polyuria, polydipsia, or say patient has come to you with short stature and delayed or faltering of growth, and patient's blood shows hyponatremia, hypokalemia, hypochloremia, metabolic alkalosis, along with that hypomagnesemia, hypercalcemia, hyperuricemia. So whenever you see this particular blood picture, you have to think of Gitelman syndrome. And now what are the causes of Gitelman syndrome? The causes of Gitelman syndrome is prolonged use of thiazide. So whenever there is prolonged use of thiazide, it is going to show this blood picture, as well as whenever there is Gitelman syndrome, it is going to show this blood picture. This is how the recalls come. Now, this is another mechanism. This is not that important. You just need to remember osmotic diuresis, how it is done. What happens is that whenever there is increase in the blood glucose, there will be increased glomerular filtration of glucose, and there will be increased osmotic pressure because of the presence of glucose in the renal tubular fluid. There will lead to decrease in the water reabsorption from the renal tubule and cause osmotic diuresis. So osmotic diuresis, who causes osmotic diuresis? So what is the name of the diuretic that causes osmotic diuresis? The name of the diuretic is mannitol. Where is it used? It is used in kind of edema. It is used in in case of cerebral edema. Also, it is used in case of idiopathic intracranial hypertension. Okay, because this is an important topic that is frequently asked in the recall, as well as there is a clinical case of idiopathic intracranial hypertension, and they ask about mannitol. Okay. Now there are some other conditions which has similar biochemical picture. Like we saw here, the hyponatremia, hypokalemia, hypochloremia with metabolic alkalosis. With the same biochemical picture, there are some other conditions. So how are you going to differentiate between these? Okay. So they are also going to present with hyponatremia, hypochloremia, hypokalemia, and metabolic alkalosis. I have not included hyponatremia here, even though it also causes, these all condition also causes hyponatremia, is because in the recall questions, mostly they do not mention about the hyponatremia. Mostly they say a patient has come to you with hypochloremia, hypokalemia, metabolic alkalosis, and they'll give you certain options and you have to differentiate. Now, how are you going to differentiate? Because all these five things causes this similar picture. So use, whenever there is pyloric stenosis, the blood picture will be hypochloremia, hypokalemia, metabolic alkalosis. So how will you differentiate? You are given this particular picture and you are given this five. So if it is pyloric stenosis, there will be paradoxical aciduria, plus the history will be the child has been vomiting. There will be history of projectile vomiting, and the child is usually less than 8 weeks old. So this is how you will differentiate. Now, chloride diarrhea, or known as congenital chloride diarrhea. It is a congenital chloride losing channelopathy. So what happens here is that there will be hypochloremia, along with that hypokalemia, metabolic alkalosis. How you will diagnose, how you're going to differentiate from pyloric stenosis is that in pyloric stenosis there is projectile vomiting, whereas in chloride diarrhea there will be history of diarrhea, and usually it resolves. There will be history of diarrhea for about 3 to 4 months, and there will be huge loss of chloride. The urinary chloride will be very high. This is important point. They will tell you, they'll give you the picture, along with that they'll tell you urinary chloride is very high. So whenever urinary chloride is high or excretion of chloride is high, and then you have to think about chloride diarrhea. It usually resolves after some time. Now, cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis, also known as pseudo Bartter. Why known as pseudo Bartter? Because the blood picture is same like Bartter. What is Bartter? Blood picture same. This one: hypochloremia, hypokalemia, metabolic alkalosis. Now, how will you differentiate from these two conditions? So, if they are saying your child has come to you with hypochloremia, hypokalemia, metabolic alkalosis, and then if it is cystic fibrosis, there will be a history of faltering growth. There will be history of repeated respiratory tract infection. So that is how you're going to differentiate. Next one is Bartter syndrome. So in case of Bartter syndrome, along with hypochloremia, hypokalemia, metabolic alkalosis, there will be this point, there will be hypocalcemia. Yes. So in Bartter syndrome, there will be hypocalcemia, and the child will come with polyuria, polydipsia. There will be faltering of growth, or may come in the form of shock, because it is very severe and presence during childhood. I even saw a question that they told that a child has come to you with polyuria, polydipsia, with hypochloremia, hypokalemia, metabolic alkalosis, and he had a maternal history. There was a history of polyhydramnios. So this is Bartter syndrome. In Bartter syndrome, there is usually a history of polyhydramnios. There is polyuria, polydipsia. Child usually presents with shock, and the blood picture is this, along with hypocalcemia. And use of diuretic. So prolonged, there will be a prolonged use of diuretic. For example, the child is having suffered from heart failure. The child was having nephrotic syndrome, because of which he was having edema. So there will be a history of use of diuretics. So they'll give you this blood picture, and this blood picture will be same in all these cases, but depending on history, you will differentiate. This is usually frequently asked in FOP as well as the TAS exam. Now, there are some other conditions that are similar to this biochemical picture. Just listen to it carefully. I did not say it is same, exactly the same biochemical picture. I said it is similar. With similar, I mean, look at this. In the previous picture, we had hypochloremia, hypokalemia, metabolic alkalosis. Here we have hyponatremia, hypokalemia, and hyperchloremia, plus metabolic acidosis. So it is not the exact similar condition. So actually they're going to give you the recalls were like, if you look through the recalls, you'll find a child has come to you and the biochemical picture given is hyponatremic, hypokalemic, hyperchloremic, metabolic acidosis. This is caused in case of RTA, renal tubular acidosis. Another condition is congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or in case of adrenal insufficiency, usually they'll give you a blood picture of hyponatremia and hyperkalemia. So whenever there is hyponatremia along with hyperkalemia and metabolic acidosis, you have to think about adrenal insufficiency or congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Next one, in case of DKA, there will be hyponatremia. That is why we give the fluid. There is hypokalemia, so we give the potassium 20 millimole per 500 ml, plus metabolic acidosis, that there will be increased blood glucose as well as increased ketones. So what they are going to do in the recalls is that they are going to give you only the blood picture. They will not give you the diagnosis. You can see the blood pictures are very closely related. But if you look closely, there are certain differences, and if you know the pathophysiology, there are certain differences. In this way you will be able to differentiate. So they'll give you this blood picture that a child has come to you with hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, metabolic acidosis. Then you have to select adrenal insufficiency, because in adrenal insufficiency there is deficiency of aldosterone. So whenever there is aldosterone is not there, there will be hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, and metabolic acidosis. So this is how they present to you. So this was all about my topic, diuretics, and this is one important topic from the part 1 exam from the last minute preparation batch, and this is how we are going to prepare. That this is not only going to include the particular topic, but it is going to include all the recall questions that are commonly asked, and also include some parts of the clinical cases, whatever is important to learn from this topic. And I'm sure if you go through this topic well from this slide, if you study it, you won't have to look at this topic again. So that's it about diuretics. Now I will hand over to Dr. Aftab.
Thank you, Dr. Fatma.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, guys. I'm Dr. Aftab Ali. Thank you, Dr. Fatma. MashaAllah, you explained very well the diuretics. Now it's my turn. So I'm going to discuss CSF circulation today. As Dr. Fatma already said, we are recording this video because that's how we are going to conduct our classes. So let's start with my topic, cerebrospinal fluid circulation. So here are my learning objective today. So first of all, what is CSF? Brief anatomy of ventricles, how CSF is produced, how CSF flow, and how CSF is absorbed from the ventricles, and what are the CSF circulation disorders, and last but not the least, recall questions. First of all, what is CSF? CSF is a ciliary fluid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord, act as cushion and protect brain and spinal cord from injuries, and it provide nutrition and remove waste material from the brain. Now the anatomy of ventricle system. There are 4 ventricles, 2 are lateral, and 1 is third ventricle, and then 4th ventricle. Ventricles are basically CSF filled cavities in the brain. Okay, this is the lateral ventricle. So lateral ventricle have a body, an antrum, and 3 horns: frontal horn, occipital horn, and the temporal horn. So in the lateral ventricle, the red line is choroid plexus, from which the CSF is produced. Next is foramen of Monro, which connect this interventricular foramen, which connects the lateral ventricle to the third ventricle. Then there is a duct known as the aqueduct of Cilius or cerebral aqueduct, which connects the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. The fourth ventricle is a like triangle or diamond shape. From this fourth ventricle, foramen of Luschka and Megendie communicate with the subarachnoid space. So CSF produced from the choroid plexus of the ventricles, mainly the lateral ventricles. This red line is the choroid plexus. In this is in the lateral ventricle, this is in the third ventricle, and there is a fourth ventricle. The mainly CSF is produced in the lateral ventricle. Then it flow like this green arrow showing the flow direction. It's flown from the lateral ventricle to the third ventricle via foramen of Monro. Then from the third ventricle via cerebral aqueduct into the fourth ventricle. Then from the fourth ventricle, it goes into the subarachnoid space via foramen of Luschka and foramen of Megendie. There are two foramen Luschka which are lateral, and there is one foramen Megendie which is central. Now moving forward with the CSF product, CSF absorption. CSF absorbs from the arachnoid villi into the dural venous sinuses, then into the blood circulation. About 80 to 150 ml of CSF is produced and absorbs between 3 to 4 times per day. So total 500 of CSF is produced daily. These orders of the CSF circulation. Here we can only discuss the hydrocephalus. So what is hydrocephalus? A condition in which CSF accumulates in the drainage system of the brains, enlarging the ventricles, which eventually enlarge the brain and cause pressure on brain. We can classify hydrocephalus by obstruction to the CSF flow, decreased absorption by arachnoid villi, increased production of CSF by choroid plexus. Now come to that picture again. So if the obstruction is at the level of the foramen Monro, so then the dilatation of the lateral ventricle occur. Okay, now if there is a obstruction at the cerebral aqueduct, then the third ventricle dilates. If there is a obstruction at the level of the Luschka and Megendie, then the fourth ventricle will be dilated. So that's how in exams the question will be like, if there is a obstruction at the foramen Luschka and Megendie, what will happen? So you will choose the answer. There will be dilatation of the fourth ventricle. Okay, now come to the second point, decreased absorption of the CSF fluid. When there is an infection like meningitis, encephalitis, or torch infection. So in these infections, so there will be decreased absorption of the CSF. If there is arachnoid villi hypoplasia, there will be decreased absorption of CSF as well. Now, increased production of CSF, it's mainly due to the CSF producing tumors like choroid plexus papilloma. Okay, now moving forward to the one example of aqueduct stenosis. So what happened in aqueduct stenosis, there is example given by the tumor. This tumor is compressing the aqueduct here. So it will dilate the third ventricle. Now I will quickly summarize all this in this picture. So in white color, you see the brain. Here it is a brain. Okay. In between the brain, there is a corpus callosum. This is the corpus callosum. So beneath the corpus callosum, there is a lateral ventricle. Lateral ventricle are of, there are two lateral ventricles. One is left and one is right. In lateral ventricle, there is a red line. It is known as a choroid plexus. From this, the CSF produce. Then there is a interventricular foramina of Monro, which is in between the lateral and third ventricle. Then this is a third ventricle. You can see. So this is the red line. It is a choroid plexus of the third ventricle. So now from the third ventricle, there is a duct known as the cerebral aqueduct, also known as the duct of Sylvius. So this duct is drained into the fourth ventricle. Here is the fourth ventricle. So in fourth ventricle, you see the red line. It is a choroid plexus of fourth ventricle. From the fourth ventricle, there are foramina known as a foramen of Luschka and Megendy. So all these are communications. There will be obstruction. Like if there is obstruction, foramen of Monro, then lateral ventricle will be dilated. If there is a problem or obstruction at the level of the cerebral aqueduct, then will be dilatation of the third ventricle. If there is a problem with the or obstruction with the Luschka and Megendy, then the fourth ventricle will be dilated. So they ask questions about these foramina or aqueduct. The CSF fluid from the fourth ventricle then into this green line, which is subarachnoid space. So it circulate around the brain whole day, protect the brain. I briefly describe all about the CSF. Now come to the recall questions, which are commonly asked, and as the recalls are recall knowledge of the exam paper, so sometimes it contain poor knowledge and they are incomplete. So don't be confused. Study these topics from books. If you study well, so these are not the problems. So the first one is the drainage site of CSF, means the absorption site of CSF, as we studied, is arachnoid villi. And number two, the dilatation of the fourth ventricle is due to, we know, the fourth ventricle drain into the subarachnoid space via Luschka and Megendy. So if there is an obstruction at the level of the foramen Luschka and Megendy, so fourth ventricle will be dilated. And the number three, which is the main site of CSF production. So we know it's a choroid plexus. Arachnoid villi are the absorption side. So this is just a demo class of our classes. Good luck, guys. So Dr. Fatima, kindly end this video with your valuable comments. Thank you, Dr. Fatima.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Aftab. You have explained really well, and I'm sure those who have seen this topic from your video, they are going to, they don't need to open the book and check, because it is all done. It is well explained, and you have actually practically included the recalls and everything. So it was very well explained. Thank you so much. So that is it. This is all about our last minute preparation batch, and I have provided all the information here. And if you have any other queries, you may WhatsApp me in this number. So this is all about it. We'll be covering clinical cases, 25 to 30 important topics with this detail. When we say we are going to cover 25 to 30 topics, we are going to cover it, including all the things that are required for you to crack the exam with this detail. Plus, we're going to cover the clinical cases as well as the recalls. There will be one recall solving class. And moreover, the recordings will be available for each class. It will be a 2-hour class every day, 10 days long batch, and we'll provide the recordings to all the participants. So that's it about our classes, and hope this was useful for you. Thank you.